Hello, listeners, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Commercial Minds podcast. I'm your host, Modu Keita, and I'm joined here by none other than
Kenny Guti. Hi, Modu. Hi, listeners. Welcome to a very special episode of the podcast.
A very special episode indeed, because today, joining in on our
commercial conversations.
Yes,
Hopefully this is like a new series that we'll be doing where we actually have the interviews and the conversations with influential people.
Yep, and we are fortunate enough to have none other than Dr. Daniel Cash with us today. So, a brief introduction of Daniel. He is a lecturer in law at Aston University and the current module leader for the Legal Skills and System and the Principles of Corporate Law modules. He is the author of 2 books, currently out, with 2 more coming out soon. He is the author of more than 30 articles, and he runs his own blog on financial regulation matters, and that is also what it is called. He has founded various networks and initiatives, the most recent of which is the Aspiring Black Lawyers Network. The aim of this network is to basically address the underrepresentation of black and mixed-race males and females within the legal sector. Daniel is someone who has been a great influence to many students, especially through the contributions of the Legal Skills and System module. To me, he is someone who I consider a mentor, and he has guided me with his insights and experiences, but most importantly, his influence has greatly boosted my academic work rate. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Daniel Cash. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Yay, first guest.
Right, so Daniel, do you want to just talk about yourself, your personal background? Tell us what's your journey been so far?
How have you been lately?
Yeah.
We'll start off with how have I been?
Yeah.
Good, busy. Where are we in terms? 3rd week, 4th week? Something like that.
Yeah.
So it's back into the flow of things as usual.
Yeah.
While you guys are always complaining in all your previous episodes about all the coursework you've got to do and all the assessments.
No, I don't remember that.
You get known for it. Somebody's got to mark them, somebody's got to make them, somebody's got to teach you how to do them. So, busy, but good busy. Happy problems.
That's good. Good to hear.
Yeah, so about me, what do you want to know?
Tell us where it all started. Was it Liverpool?
Liverpool.
Yep.
So, a question mark on your question, Liverpool.
Yeah.
You can tell by my accent exactly where I'm from. Yeah. So, so I was born in the late 80s in Liverpool, which was... Liverpool is a very unique city. Very unique in the 80s because it was after the riots within certain sectors of Liverpool, so it kind of defines the culture in where I grew up in terms of different understandings on life, different pressures, blah blah blah. So so that's where I was raised. I'm from a mixed race background. My mum's white, my dad's black. And then they split up, so I had a single parent family. That's where I grew up. But those types of backgrounds usually bring a lot of pressures, a lot of hardship. I'm no different, but I'm very fortunate. I had a lot of support, both within my own family and also from people in school. I had some good teachers along the way, fortunately. Yes, still got caught up in some of the issues that affect young men growing up in those type of areas. That's all I'll say on that one. You could,
Shall we press him further on that?
Let's not do it. You've done criminal law and things like that. But, so that's my growing ups. It was hard. But you learn a lot from it. I learned a lot of skill sets from it. Probably stayed on the wrong side of the tracks a bit longer than I had to in terms of behaviours. But but eventually, so I was thinking about this before because obviously I knew it was coming on.
We questioned you about it for a while.
Yeah, true. GCSEs were good. I enjoyed GCSEs, done okay. Went into A-levels and wanted to be a graphic designer. Got my result and realised I didn't want to be a graphic designer anymore because it had gone horribly wrong.
Ooh.
So I picked art, graphics, IT.
A-levels is where it usually
And it was
goes
just
from. Yeah.
no, and no. So changed over to written-based subjects, so English, business studies, something else. Still, though, with some of those old behaviours which I shouldn't have had and which are not progressive for doing well.
Did you enjoy that shift to those essay-based?
Yes. In terms of, I've always liked writing, and then speaking to a student today in one of my meetings was, we were talking about I used to actively pick subjects once I went to university that were coursework based, not exam based, because they're very different and just seem to fit my skill set in terms of preparing over a period of time, and then executing it in a structured plan rather than 2 hours go. You know the difference, you two.
I do want to ask, did you sort of feel like pressured in any way to like go to uni? And like you said, you spent a lot of time, more time than you probably should have, on the wrong side of the tracks. Did you was it a conscious decision within yourself? Okay, I need to change and make sure.
No, not at all. I don't think I never felt the pressure to go, but I remember being young, and my mother said to me, "Get your degree, and your life's your own." Once you get your degree, she hadn't got her degree. She hadn't been to university, but she went to university the same time as I did. We were in the same class. So, at least if you're going to advise somebody to do something, really, you should have done something or similar. Otherwise, people don't buy into it, so she did.
That must have been unique.
Very unique. With me and my mother at the front of a class.
Wow. You are not allowed to misbehave then.
Well, it depends, because my mother's worse than me. Sometimes she's misbehaving and I'm like, "Will you stop it, Mum?" But what happened was, those bad behaviours carried on through into university, so I was fortunate enough to get an unconditional offer at the University of Liverpool. I chose to read for sociology and criminology. Same degree as my mother, so we're in the same class, probably. But even into the first year, I still had those bad behaviours. And one day I turned up home, and my mum was like, "Bags packed." I was like, "Does that mean I'm leaving?" She said, "No, we're going to New York." So she just took me to New York.
Wow.
But it was not it was a holiday, but it was more than that. It was nice. A point of being, it wasn't for that purpose. It wasn't to enjoy it, it was to see it. And it was to give a different view on the world. And because one of the issues, we'll talk about the Aspiring Black Lawyers Network later, but one of the things that we really focus on when we're trying to develop people who come from the background that a lot of black people come from, which is, I'm trying to use the right word, but you obviously come from disadvantage. A lot of times you don't get to see what's possible. And that's what constrains a lot of people's progression. And it's usually not, sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not talent that's stopping people, it's they don't know what's possible for them. So going to New York showed me what's possible with the big buildings, the fast pace of life. Have either of you ever been to New York?
I was born there, actually.
Were you born there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Always hope
I didn't know that. That's news to me.
It's my one unique thing. But none of my parents lived there. But it was a case that they were on holiday, and I think I just arrived early. So yeah,
looking for a free holiday.
Yeah, of course. And I got a nice American passport, which is always nice. So
wow, I didn't know that.
A visa.
Didn't know that. Have you been since you've been bigger than that big?
Yeah. Last time I went was 2012, I think.
Okay. So I think you can empathise when I say it's pretty unique.
Yeah.
In terms of it's fast, I know London's fast paced in Paris, but it's really unique in terms of its attitude, and I just synced up with it. Just really synced and felt into it. So came back, instantly dropped those bad behaviours instantly.
Would you say that was, like you said, knowing what was possible and now having a clear goal?
Immediate. It was almost the day I got back. It was change.
So that was your turning point then?
Yeah. And then changed my friend circle. A couple of my old friends stayed. I'm still close to them now because we were really good friends. A lot of the people were associated with friends because of the behaviours we were doing. And then once that behaviour fell away, so did they. And that's something you were asking me about advice for students. We're going to talk about that later.
Yeah.
But that's something key is accept that you will change, because a lot of people won't change. But they're my friends, and they're my friends for life. And sometimes you just change phase, and that's fine. But that's what happened. So I came back, managed to get a 2-1 in my degree.
Well done.
Thank you. But I always wanted to do something business related. Always fascinated by business. So I applied for my LLM in the University of Liverpool to do international business law. Went there and loved it. I just really finished top of my year for the Masters. And that's where I met credit rating agencies, which we'll talk about shortly.
Yes,
But after that, took a couple of years out, working, doing this, that, worked in bars, pubs, managed bars, and then was fortunate enough I was applying for PhDs, because I always want to be an academic. Because somebody, actually a good professor, a good friend of mine in the University of Liverpool, he came in to speak to us, and he opened his talk with, who likes lying in and drinking alcohol? And obviously, everyone. He said, well, if you like that, get a PhD, because that's the life you get, because that's what I do. I'm probably drunk right now, so it's fantastic. So that's what I've been promised, and that's what I do. But that's what...
How true have you found that?
Yeah. It's pretty true. It's pretty accurate. But that's what I just wanted to do. So I applied for a number of places and got... acceptances from Lancaster University, but that was just a place and no funding, and got an acceptance from Durham University, and that was on a half scholarship. I had to take Durham, even though my accommodation far outweighed the cost of my scholarship, so I had to work to live and blah blah blah, but it's Durham. Durham was a massive turning point in my life. It was very positive. It was hard, because coming from a place where I come from, there was no one like me in Durham at all. Like, honestly, I believe they thought they'd let the cleaner in the first day I turned up, because there was just a lot of people going to private schools and private backgrounds, and it's very different. But they're really nice people. And you get quite an education there. So I finished there in 2016. Finished 6 months early, so I've done my PhD in about 2.5 years.
How did you manage that?
Rather negatively. It had a positive outcome, but it was a very negative approach in terms of absolute obsession with completing it. Absolute.
Okay. It's not so negative, I would say, because you need that obsession to an extent.
It is. I agree with that. Obsession's important. Obsession usually has a negative connotation, but it can be positive. But it's all relative. It depends how obsessive you are, because I was just all in. So for 3 years, I was just off the grid, just focused on it every day. And it worked, because, I ended up passing straight through with flying colours. My book was published. I got my contract in about 2 days after. It was quick, because I'd done the work. But I look back on that time, it was very unhealthy. It's an unhealthy way to live. Sometimes you can be obsessive, but probably I would suggest knowing what I know now, to do it in probably short bursts.
Yeah.
Because I follow a lot of motivational speakers, I know a lot of sportsmen. So like I was listening to a podcast today with Conor McGregor, the UFC fighter, who's saying, I'm obsessed with this life. And I don't think that's true, because you can be obsessed, but it doesn't have to be you put yourself in harm's way to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So 2016, past that. Interview here in Aston. Came down, and one of the striking features, because talking openly, academia is very hierarchical. So you have Oxford Cambridge, then you have your Russell group, then you have your non-Russell group, and usually what happens is each sector is trying to be the one above. So you have all polytechnics who are trying to be Russell groups. You have Russell groups who'd love to be Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, UCL, LSE. And I was advised not to come here because it's a big drop in terms of the hierarchy to come from Durham to a place like Aston. And I think the reason why I came, and the reason why I'm still here, is there's a particular culture that aligns with my moral outlook, which is student first. It's a lot of development in students' progression, more so than I've seen in other places, definitely more so than I experienced. So I remember a phrase I often use, and I did say I wouldn't swear in this podcast, but it's a quote, so it doesn't count.
Go ahead.
But a lecturer said to me I did hear a lecturer say to a student who came to ask for help in University of Liverpool, fuck off and find out. And that's the old traditional Russell Group way of learn it yourself, because on one side there's a skill set in having to go through that process to learn those skills yourself, and you become probably a lot tougher and resilient for it. But my argument is those days have changed. And the diverse group of students who come to university nowadays with the open market, I don't think that applies well, and I think that relates to the student suicide crisis we're having in this country, where you have Bristol and York really grabbing the headlines. I don't think it's a coincidence that they're Russell Group universities where that's happening. So I think what I liked about coming here is it was a very different culture. It was student first. When I introduced, I know you guys know this, when I introduced a lot of my well-being initiatives and welfare initiatives, there was not a lot of pushback on that, which is good. So I think that's why I'm still here. At the moment, it's fit into my culture. That might not be the way all the time. It might move on, blah, blah, blah. But, so that's me so far.
I do remember you talking about, like, the well-being stuff and all that in, like, our first lecture.
Well, even now, if you could speak to the current first years now, we do sleep training, how to sleep properly, how to get the right amount of sleep, nutrition, dietitians come in to speak to students. We have mental health officials.
You didn't do this for us last year.
Well, it's a learning process, isn't it? So I learn every year and try and change it, but this year what we've done is we really focused on the preparation to perform rather than pushing the need to perform, because we're taking a view of with that stage covered, you're more likely to do better. So I have, as you said, I'm big and scary. I have taken that and used it to hopefully ban students from drinking Red Bull. So now I said, if I catch you drinking Red Bull, I'm going to come after you. And I've had a few students say, I won't touch it, I promise. Because what it does is it shows that you are needing it to do something that you really shouldn't be doing, which is probably pushing the limits, which is not optimal for your performance. So that's what we're trying to do here in the law school, is take a different approach to people's performance.
I remember I think I've heard this quote somewhere before, I have no idea where, but they were like, life isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. So you have to keep going consistently, rather than slacking off for a month and then doing sprinting basically for 2 weeks before your deadlines are due.
It's just not healthy, and I think there's a healthier way to go about business rather than the old way, which was high stress, high pressure. Some people do thrive off that, and I often hear students say, but I perform better under pressure. So that might be the case, but if you tried an alternative way, and you go, well, not really. We'll give it a go. So I now have students regularly update me on how many hours sleep they're getting, which is positive, because one student said I've only got 4 for the past 7 nights, 4 a night, but that's not optimal. Why are you only getting 4? And then we open a discussion about what's going on outside of university, maybe home life. Try to come up with a strategy to fix it in order to allow him to return to his performance. So that's what we do here.
Modi, how many hours sleep did you get last night?
I went to sleep around 12 and I woke up at 8. Okay. That's usually my clock.
Perfect.
That's my body clock.
Okay. Good 8 hours, yeah.
How about you?
Run boy? Yeah, that's what I call it.
How many hours sleep do you get, Tenny?
Well,
how much sleep do you get in exam season?
That doesn't count. Let's say last night, as a sample, how much sleep did you get?
Okay. I'm gonna say a good 8 hours. Yeah. 8 hours.
Do we believe him, Mo?
Yeah, we believe him.
And we'll leave it at that.
Fair enough.
But yeah, definitely agree with you there. The balance is needed. But actually, would you say your obsession, whilst you were at Durham, kind of helped you deal with, because you said there weren't a lot of people like you at the university, so there's inclusion issues there. Would you say that helped you deal with it in kind of just getting your head down? And
well, it helps you deal with it because by not dealing with it. Because to deal with inclusion in a more progressive and healthy manner is you would put yourself out there, make new friends, meet new people, expose yourself to new experiences. I didn't do that. I just worked. So yes, I had the output at the end. But I mean, if you ask me now, would I go back and change it? I'd say no. Because I needed that output. That was more, to me, back then, the output was the most important thing. That's what I was aiming for. So I think I almost done it almost autistically in terms of I aimed to have my PhD by the time I was 30. That was my aim. So my birthday's on the 10th of January. And my, they call it a congregation there, but my graduation was on the 12th. So I missed it by 2 days.
Oh.
That's how close it was. And I was saying, well, can't I just change graduation ceremony, please? No, it's the only one. But it was very fixed mindset, very structured. This is what I'm doing. And positively, it wasn't difficult. So that's why, I mean, if I was to say to you guys now, about 100,000 word thesis, and you guys are doing about 3,000-4,000, what are you doing in the second year? 3,000 or 4,000 word?
You're doing like 2,000.
Well, we won't get into that. But, so let's say a couple of thousand, a few thousand words. It's a big jump.
Yes.
It was not hard.
That kind of actually scared me when he was saying those figures.
Oh, no, but it wasn't hard.
No, not at all. I didn't find it difficult in the slightest because I was in just so much in that zone. And there was nothing in terms of academically and work-wise, there's nothing I wasn't willing to do to get to that outcome, which was total investment.
But that's because you also enjoyed it though, right?
I enjoyed it. There wasn't, I'm not going to say I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't healthy, but I did enjoy it. And I think I took short-term hit for a long-term gain in terms of I knew if I got that PhD in particular from that institution, if I made the right connections around my PhD, so with my supervisors, with the people I met, so I met my mentor there, who's changed my life. If I knew if I took the hit there and really focused, for the rest of my life I'd essentially do what I want. And it's turned out to be the case that now I'm enjoying the fruit of my labour in terms of those 3 years. So it's a difficult one. Would I advise people to do what I did in terms of obsessional behaviour? I don't know. Because on one side I say, no, don't do that because it's not healthy. There's healthier ways to go about it. But there's people I work with who did go and expose themselves to making new friends and joining this society. They didn't do what I did. They didn't have the output I got at the end. Some of them are still there now, and I haven't been there for 5 years. They're still struggling to finish and complete because they weren't obsessed enough. So it's a balance. But I think I would argue that you do that if you really need to. I don't think you should be obsessed over something that you really don't need to be obsessed over, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But if you
self-aware.
if you really need it, it's something part of your longer term strategy, then go for it. Do you know what I mean? So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. No. I want to just stray off the path a little bit and ask you quite a deep question. So we're obviously I brought up the topic of inclusion during your time at Durham. So currently in the workplace, especially in the I wouldn't say especially in the legal industry, but in the professional world, there's I think it was you mentioning this to me, and they actually did a report on it recently. But the issue isn't so much for getting diverse people in the workplace, but it's actually keeping them there because they don't feel included.
And also going up the ladder.
Yeah. So, how do you see firms dealing with that for the future?
Let's focus on the legal sector because you're both doing law degrees. You want to join the legal sector, I assume. The key answer really is, I mean, I could throw lots of initiatives at you, lots of things to me. People need to want to do it. People need to want to change. It's that simple. So, let's say on both sides, you need a couple of things. And this is where I hope the Aspiring Black Lawyers initiative comes in, which we can talk about now if we have to. So on the side of people who are trying to break through that barrier, we need more. In terms of we need more confidence, we need more self-belief. Probably, I wouldn't say more commitment, because just because you're from a diverse doesn't change your commitment, but probably an awareness of the need to break that barrier because it exists, if that makes sense. And on the other side, you need to have people who are open to that idea. I'm not saying, so let's say we won't focus on a particular gender or race or ability. But you need people in that place, and you don't have to be racist to not want black people to do well. Because it might not be about black people, it might be about change. You're used to what you're used to as, let's say, maybe, for example, a white partner in a law firm. You know what you know. It's always been like that, and it should always be like that. It might not be that you just don't want black people to achieve. It might be that you just don't want things to change. And it's about changing the mindset at the top to allow, because breaking the barrier by force is much more difficult and requires much more energy than the people breaking the barriers from the top and then meeting in the middle and moving together. That makes sense. So what we do in terms of what I'm hoping to do in terms of the Aspiring Black Lawyers thing is, so are you happy to talk about it?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So Aspiring Black Lawyers started off with somebody asking me, what is the law school doing for Black History Month? And to our shame, the answer is nothing, which is not good. So the answer was nothing. I was like, well, why is it nothing? That's not right. What are we doing? So I think it was us three in the room, we were talking about what we could do, and we talking about this podcast and different things, and we got onto Black History Month, and the idea of maybe putting together a little bit of a network so people could come together started, and since then it is absolutely snowballed. So you guys with the launch we had in Birmingham, we had a lot of people show interest in it, because what we're trying to do is to bring something different to the table. There are, and I've got to be careful how I say this, because I'm not trying to denigrate anyone else. The point is you work together for a common cause. I'm not trying to say mine is better than X and better than Y. But I want to do something different. So what usually happens is you have networks that exist and allow people to come together, and they'll have events every month or every quarter. You go and network. I mean, you guys have been to these networking events.
Yeah.
And that's it. And you just move on to the next thing. And there is a power in a community. I agree with that. So I'm trying to do something a little bit different. So what we're going to do is we're going to form a first of its type in the nation training model. where different levels of black and mixed race students are exposed to different levels of training. So it starts with pre-18, so school age, A-level.
Yeah.
The next phase is university level students, so that could be apprentices, university level, those who've gone on to higher national diplomas. It's not just universities. Then you have early careers, so junior members of the profession who've made that jump from university into the profession but they're finding it difficult, or maybe it's about, do I fit in here, and then we focus on the firms. So it's the whole point of it is to be holistic. And what we're going to do is, I'm not going to give too much away now as we still develop it, but it's going to be based really on 4 streams. Building up soft skills. So there's lots of skills that happen and are needed that a lot of people from black and mixed race backgrounds don't have because they haven't been taught. How else would you know? So it could be things like how to cope in a meeting, how to dress appropriately for that meeting but not that meeting, and how to take... So, for example, we were talking before the podcast started about monitoring your own tweets now, making sure that you are not putting yourself at a disadvantage in the future with what you do now and blah, blah, blah. Soft skills.
So like professionally.
Yeah, but then we're doing professional skills, so how to interact within certain scenarios when you're dealing with like workplace issues or what have you. And then we're doing health, so black health. So issues that may be particular. So, for example, there's an increased rate of prostate cancer in black men than there is to white men and things like that. So making awareness more rounded in terms of black health. And also the impact of a lot of people's development on their own, things like mental health. And then the final thing is black culture. So one of the things that brought that strand about is a student who I won't name, but you guys know him because he's in your year, and we were talking about a lot of the law firms that you guys know. A lot of them got diversity initiatives, correct?
Yeah.
And a lot of them, if you think about it, they pushed it. We're very diverse and we have this. And he said to me, what does diversity mean? Does it mean assimilation? Does it mean, yes, we're diverse, but once you come into our doors and join our law firm, you've essentially got to act like us. And we're white, so that's how it is. And that's, I think that's a credible fear. I'm not saying that's the truth, but it's a fear, and that potential fear impacts your performance and your outlook. And a lot of people may not go to, let's say, a certain law firm because they predict how they'll be treated. So we're trying to, what I want to do is, with this black culture element, is celebrate black culture, be proud of it. Don't be, I'm going to change to be like that, whatever that is, because the question then becomes, what is diversity? True diversity is, you bring what you've got to the table, I'll bring what I've got, she'll bring what she's got, and the table is stronger because of it. It can't be, come to the table, but I'm going to tell you how to act. There is professional standards that you must maintain, which I agree with, and that's where the professional skills come in. But that's not an identity. You have to maintain your identity because you'll be more powerful if you bring your identity to the table.
It's diversity of thought, diversity of experience.
And that diversity of background, experience, thought will, I believe, I mean, I was in a meeting today and we were talking about what is the future of the law. And a lot of people say artificial intelligence or the different economic environment. I think diversity.
Yeah.
I think honestly, truly diversity is the key. If the law industry doesn't get it right, it will suffer because society is changing too quick for it not to. So hopefully, so I take my sabbatical in September, so I won't be here. And during that sabbatical, one of my projects is to really ramp this aspiring black lawyers training thing because I want it to be an actual qualification where you can apply, you get trained, like a formal training session as you go through, and you gain a qualification and is accredited. So that's what I've got to do.
Definitely sounds great.
I want to ask you this. So with the scheme, what do you see it looking like in, say, 5 years from now?
Oh, 5 years? I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be national. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be franchised out. I'm not going to make any money out of this. It's not a financial reward. There's no reason why that qualification, that training basis in terms of impacting and influencing firms, influencing people at different phases of development, there's no reason why that shouldn't be national. And particularly one of the key hubs will be London. Because, I mean, you guys, I worked with, just to give some context to the listeners, Freshfields, Brookhouse, Derringer is a magic circle firm, one of the biggest law firms in the world. And they have a scholarship named the Stephen Lawrence Scholarship, which is one of the leaders in the field in terms of this access to the profession, just because of what it offers. And universities will nominate students, so it's particularly for black males, because they're trying to address underrepresentation of black males in the height of the commercial legal sector. And I nominated you two guys, didn't I? And even when we were having the discussions before you went, there were fears. What will it be like? And I remember talking to you both, and I was saying, just go for the food, just to alleviate your fears of will I be accepted. And when you got there, I think you can both talk to it if you would like.
Yeah.
It's very different from what you predicted.
Definitely, I would agree. Yeah, I think the food tip was definitely helpful because it just you stop thinking about the other stuff. But when you get there, you kind of realize that you're not in it alone. So you're also seeing other people with the same. You're actually talking to them about it. You're talking to each other. Yeah. Oh my goodness, what if we don't fit in? But the more you gel, the more you bond with each other, and you talk to the staff there, and they're telling you what they want to achieve with this. The more you're like. The more you just you feel more at ease and
definitely.
Yeah.
How did you find it, Teddy?
Yeah, I'd pretty much echo everything that Modi just said. Yeah, it was a good experience. Yeah, it was. I've been to like a lot of these networking events. Some would say too many, but yeah, I've been to a lot
for the food. Is that why?
Just go to talk to people, to be honest. But
yeah.
No, there was definitely an atmosphere of like. As you were just talking about, like, we want, like, your diversity of, like, who you are. Like, we want unique people. And definitely. We want you to bring, like, who you are to the table and not just, like, just diversity on face value, I guess.
Well, it's important. I think, I speak to somebody today, we talk about the human element is vital and is often underrepresented. So we want people to be unique and to be who they are and to bring who they are to the table. Well, otherwise, you might just have a room full of robots who are doing the same thing over and over again. And if you want to think outside the box and be creative, if you're telling somebody to assimilate into a prejudged character, they're not likely to do that. And that's a lot of where value is in terms of those people's thoughts. But just a final word on Stephen Lawrence Scholarship, it truly is fantastic what it's doing. One of the privileges of my life was in December when so a student before you guys, I think maybe 2 years ahead of you, Rodwell. Rodwell successfully went through the scholarship. He's now got his training contract at Freshfields, and they had a graduation ceremony for him in London, and Annette, who runs the scholarship, I love Annette. Annette's amazing. She's just truly inspirational. And she asked me to speak. Me? You don't want disco, so speak with this friend, it's terrible. And she said, what we'll do is there'll be a little bit of an interview with someone else, and then you'll speak after her, and then that's it. Okay, who's she? Who you keep referring to she? Oh, that's Doreen Lawrence. What? You want me to speak after Doreen Lawrence, who's after what happened to Stephen, she's gone off and just made such a massive impact in terms of race relations and race as a concept. We're talking in Britain, which we have a particular issue in terms of black British, and she's been leading the way on so many things. I was just in awe, just starstruck. And then to see Rodwell and the other scholars come up and get their scholarships, certificates, it was unbelievable. And then I stood up and just rambled like a Scouser just talking about why it's important that the scholarship exists and the sentiment and what we have to do in terms of you can't stop. We have to keep pushing, because the minute we even take a minute off from this agenda that we have of levelling the playing field and giving people opportunities, irrespective of where they're from, and if they do need help to get up to a certain level, we give it to them. We've got standing ovation. Well, we should do something else. There's a real privilege to be there in terms of being part of that. So just wanted to say a word on that. Hopefully the Aspiring Black Lawyers Initiative goes even a quarter of the way of what Annette's initiative is doing.
I'm sure it will. From the way you describe it, I think it's really gonna change lives.
Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Alright.
So,
shall we? You mentioned a little bit about this credit ratings.
Yeah.
That must be a buzzword for you at this point, because
That's all I know.
I want to know how this area sparked up.
Okay. So I started my masters in 2011.
I was at University of Liverpool. Right?
University of Liverpool. So that's it was about 3 or 4 years after the height of the crisis. International business law, one of the modules was corporate governance, and a lecturer of mine, Abigail Stewart, who is one of my favourite people in the world, she's amazing, and she's talking to us, and she split her lectures up in terms of different industries. So we spoke about accountants and auditors, investment banking, and then on one of them was credit rating agencies. I'd never heard of them before. And she just told us the story of who they were, their involvement in the credit crisis, what's happened since, blah, 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 which we'll talk about in a second. And at the end, I asked her, how did they get away with that? And she just shrugged her shoulders. So I don't know. I mean, it's ridiculous, but I don't know. And funnily enough, when I published my first book, I sent it to her with a personal note and put from a shrug of her shoulders a whole career. Because since then, that's all I focused on, because I was just fascinated by it. So, for your listeners, bit of a context, credit rating agencies, they essentially exist to reduce risk for investors. So one way an investor can reduce risk is by adding interest to their investment or their loan, But you always want to reduce your risk, so that's what auditors exist for, to give a clean third-party, independent viewpoint of a company's accounts, what have you. And what a credit rating agency do is they have one question to answer. How likely are you to receive your investment in full and on time? That's all they ask. And they will go and investigate a company who's seeking to lend money, and they will investigate how well they're run, what's their organisation's objectives, what are they exposed to, all sorts of data, and they come to a ranking. And you will traditionally have AAA, AA, single A, B, blah, blah, and it depends on what you get. So AAA is the top ranking, and essentially, not guarantees, but essentially means you will get your investment back on time.
Even AAA is not guaranteed.
AAA can't. Well, you can't guarantee it. It's the future, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the credit rating agencies certainly wouldn't guarantee it, because if you don't get your money back, they're liable. So it's what they do is they say their ratings are opinions. And what happens is businesses...
We're talking about non-reliance in commercial law as well. So.
That's what you're talking about at the minute with Adam.
Yeah. I've always thought, you're giving advice. I'm going to hold you to it, but now
what they do is they're American based. So as you know, I spend a lot of time in America, and that's why, because they're based in New York. And they're covered by the First. Is it the First Amendment or Second Amendment? I always forget. But the freedom of speech. They give an opinion, and that's how they protect themselves. That's what they don't get held liable if things go wrong. And what happened in the crisis was they don't just rate companies; they'll rate anything that can produce an outcome. So they were rating what was happening is, very quickly, mortgages. People will sign up to a mortgage and pay it off over time, so you've got a stream of money going towards the total. And what they were doing is pooling those mortgages together, and the money that people were paying every month was getting collected into a stream, and investors were essentially buying sectors of that stream. They were called tranches, so it's a slice of that outcome. Think of like a sausage machine, and the meat comes out the end and people get certain sections of it. But certain investors aren't allowed to invest in certain risks because they're big investors. So let's say, good example is a pension fund. Because a pension fund hold, let's say, 10,000 people's pensions in their pot, they have to be constrained with what they can invest in, because if they lose it all, a lot of people suffer. So they are usually, regulators say you can only invest in AAA because they deem it safe enough.
Is there like a universal sort of ranking?
No.
So
There's two, in the credit rating industry, there's 3 major credit rating agencies, but 2 are so big it's really only 2. Moody's and Standard & Poor's. And Standard & Poor's and Moody's have different ratings. So Standard & Poor's have AAA, and then Moody's have like AA+, blah, blah, blah. But they're essentially the same. But they use different things to come up with that. One is more data driven and the other one is more qualitative, so they'll ask questions and interviews more. One will use computer based software to come. But it's essentially the same thing.
I mean, over time, which has proved to be more effective or more popular?
Well, it's the same. It's the same. But Standard & Poor's is the biggest.
Okay.
Only by about 6% of the market share. But credit ratings have been battered since, as a concept, and agencies have been battered since the crisis because it all went wrong.
Yeah.
Because what was happening is all of those mortgages, they didn't understand the risk of each mortgage, and they just put risk on the whole pool. And because people were taking out loans when they couldn't afford them, because they were selling them cheap, blah, blah, blah. Once one went, another went, and another went, and another went, and another went. People stopped paying. Next thing, everyone stopped paying. And there's no money coming out at the end of the machine. That is the credit crunch. Because then there's no money left coming out. And they got that wrong. And a lot of people invested in it and lost a lot of money. So since then, the credit rating agencies have been really battered by the press, by academia, by regulators. So they've had record fines of collectively about $2 billion between them.
Wow.
But they are humongous companies. They can deal with those fines. But like you asked about accuracy, they're very accurate. So when it comes to corporate bonds, let's say Tesco needs money and it will issue a debt. They will say, and then investors will give them the money. Once credit rating agencies, let's say Moody's, rates Tesco as, let's say, AAA, historically, that's what will happen. You will get your money back because they're corporate bonds. But when it comes to structured finance, which is the mortgage thing, it's massively inaccurate. Massively.
Would you blame the credit crunch on these agencies? Or would you blame other people taking out mortgages that they can't afford? Or would you blame the banks?
There's so many factors. Probably best to blame everybody who's involved. But the one that got me, which is why I solely focus on credit rating, that's all I write about. It wouldn't have been possible without them. And that's what fascinates me. And the more I learn, a lot wouldn't be possible without them. So they're almost central. Like, I know that accountants and auditors are one of the oldest professions, financially speaking, and will always be in existence. So if you want a job and you think, what's the most safest job in my... Go and join PricewaterhouseCoopers, because they will always exist, because they are central to capitalism. People who invest are not incentivized to check on their management because their investment's too small. So that's what PricewaterhouseCoopers do for you. They give you a clean bill of health to show your investors and shareholders management's fine.
But isn't that like one of the professions that's like most likely to be replaced by automation in the coming years? Just because like...
Well, it can do, but who sets the automation in? Someone's got to do it. So you can set up software, and then let's say the company declares its accounts, and then somebody can say, yes, the accounts all match up. But what if the company is give you the wrong information? Will the computers figure that out? Because fraud happens all the time. You may do it by mistake in terms of issue wrong statements, or you may do it on purpose in order to disguise what you're doing. And the question is, will you find out if someone automates that process? So potentially, but I would say not at all. And they are humongous companies, they will protect themselves. These PricewaterhouseCoopers, I think revenue is like 15 billion a year or something. They will protect themselves. That big four is an oligopoly and will remain so. Yeah. And the same with the credit rating agency.
You don't see anyone, like, any new players sort of coming into that sort of big force?
Well, this is what my study, all my books are about. One of my books is about oligopolies and natural oligopolies. Yeah. You can't break into it by design, because the people who are using your products don't need lots of people giving them opinions. They only need a few people. So if credit ratings, let's say, if you get 2 credit ratings, which you need for certain things, and you trust those people, relatively speaking, what's the point in having 4 more other people tell you different things? Or tell you the same thing? Because then the question is, are you just following them? It's too much doubt, and what investors don't need is doubt. They need as much certainty as possible. So it's a natural, same with the auditors. So, because how would you trust them?
So how many books have you written on this?
So I've written 2 books at the minute. My next book is due in about 20 days, so I'm very busy. And the next book after that is due 3 months later, so I'm halfway through that.
You already have like a book coming before you've secured the next one now?
No, they're all contracted.
Oh, okay.
So
but they just got to be finished.
The same. So what is
the process of writing?
The process of writing a book, basically.
Well, I wish I was like Kim Kardashian, just talking to somebody and they go off and do it all. No one does it for me. Essentially, you need a central premise to stick to, that you can anchor to, because the only way I can describe it in terms that you 2 guys will really get is, it's easier to write 60,000 words than it is to write 3,000. And now the faces the listeners can't see. But what I mean by that, the premise is,
I get it, but
you
I don't
guys,
want to get it.
Yeah, you don't want to. But it gives, the reason why I like it gives you room to flesh out ideas and build on story. I like telling stories. But with 3,000 words, you've got to get straight to the point, to be structured. There's a reason why we give you those assessments at that level, because it increases your ability to write succinctly. But with a book, like my next book is an edited collection, so people from all around the world are contributing chapters to it. But the book after that is a history of Moody's, and that'll be about 70,000 words. And it gives you a chance to build a narrative across. So what I usually do is start by just reading and taking as many notes as possible, so you can end up with hundreds and hundreds of pages of notes. Then I go through a process that my mentor taught me in Durham, which was to be absolutely almost, what's the word I'm looking for? It's strategic beyond belief, but it's very surgical. What's the word? Very surgical in terms of breaking it down in terms of plan. this note will go there, this phrase, this comment will go there, it plays with that comment, blah, blah. And the plan is extraordinarily detailed. And I sit down and write.
And how did that come to you over the years? Like,
well, it came through. One of the things when we talked about earlier about University of Liverpool and fuck off and find out. What we do. I'm doing well. The 2 swear words I've used with a quote, that's not bad. But what I did learn was sometimes you just need to be told. And I don't there's a power in learning it yourself and blah blah blah. Sometimes you just need to be told. And I was told. My mentor taught me how to do it. And by being strategic, it makes things so much easier. And by being surgical with the plan, you essentially, the time as we do it, well, I feel sorry for you guys because I'm starting to learn how to teach legal skills better and better each year, and you guys missed it last year. What we do this year is we teach about a pyramid. So we have a research pyramid and a process pyramid, and these live together. And the research pyramid at the bottom, you can look at this in my new chapter. So I wrote a chapter recently in a business school book.
You taught us that.
Did I?
Yeah.
Oh, so I must have been
that's
doing it.
on my wall.
Good.
Yeah.
So on the bottom you have textbooks. This is the research pyramid, and textbooks have a certain aim to introduce somebody who really doesn't know about the subject to the subject. So it has to be broad. That's the point. That's why the 600 pages big. The top of the pyramid is where the articles live, and they are very acute because they have a certain aim and they expect you to have a background in the subject. Fine. And the analysis is much cleaner, much more in depth. So what I do is I will make sure I have my base in terms of my notes. I've read my textbooks. So in the process pyramid, it starts with uninformed research questions. What are credit rating agencies? And then you answer that with the bottom of the research pyramid. Once you feel comfortable that you've answered all your simple research questions, you move up to informed research questions. What is the impact of credit rating agencies? How do their methodologies actually work? Blah, blah, blah. And you can only answer that by the articles. You can't answer that by the textbooks because it's too broad. You move up the process pyramid. Once you've answered those questions and you feel comfortable and you have all these notes that are answering these research questions, the next stage is to plan. And you plan efficiently and strategically and surgically. This goes into this. It will feed into this. I've got the notes for this which feed into this. Usually what we do, I speak to students now about clouds. So the first cloud, particularly small, it's entering into the subject. The next cloud in your essay is building the subject more, which means you need more articles within that cloud. Get to the last cloud, which is towards the end of your essay. That's your big point. You have more articles still whirling around a cloud, and then you conclude. I just do that on a much bigger basis with the book. And the last stage of the process pyramid is right at the top, and that's writing. Writing should be the least but the least time-consuming element of the research, of the process pyramid.
What I've learned is, although it's supposed to be that I used to do writing with the editing, and if you don't distinguish, well, for me anyway, I learned that when I distinguished two, like if I write and then I edit it afterwards, what I've written.
What does that mean, writing and editing?
Writing as in, well, what I do is, no, what I mean by writing is just writing. I just kind of blurt it all out on the page, right?
But how do you know what to write?
But no, obviously you've done the
so you've
research
done it after
before.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't mean just.
Well, you'd be surprised how many students do that. A number of students will, like, this year we give them an essay on judicial precedent, and they just vomited on the page everything they thought they knew about judicial precedent. I was like, but that's not university level writing, and that's what we have to change. I think what you're talking about is, don't get this misconfused. When I write, sometimes I have to go and do more reading, or sometimes I'll read it back when that doesn't make sense. It's not you've got to the writing stage and then you just write and your book is right in front of you and you send it to the publisher. There's a lot of back and forth, but as long as you get that pre-writing stage done, it makes everything easier. And I think, what do I hear most students? How do I get a first? And I'll say, go and read. And they say, oh, okay, what else can I do? Yeah, just do that. Just go and read. I'll give you an example. If anyone ever asks you, what are you doing for your degree? You say, I don't do a degree. I read for a degree. That's technically what it's called. You read for a degree, and there's no other way I can use it. It's fundamental. And that's what is going to give you your knowledge, your experience, your skill set. And that's what employers are going to want to pay you for. So it's a simple exchange. Do your reading, gain your knowledge and your skill set, and someone will pay you for that. And that is the end of it. It's really simple when you think about it, but it takes a lot of work. But there's things you can do. You don't have to... should I say this on this podcast? Probably not.
Do it.
I've got 3 degrees, yeah. I have never read a book cover to cover, other than one book, and it was Nelson Mandela's autobiography. What's the reason for that? Because I physically don't have enough time to read all the books I need cover to cover, because I don't need to. There'll be certain things I need from a book, and I'll go in, get it, and get out. And sometimes I might have to go back into that book 2 weeks later and get something else. But that's the process. It's called, there's actually a name for it, I think it's called book breaking. And it's about getting what you need from a book, and there's a way to do it. So you'll do things like, you guys are blessed to be in the digital era. Go online, Control and F, go into a book, get what you need by keywords, take your notes and get back out.
That keyword combination has saved me literally hours.
Yes. Sometimes there will be reading you have to do that's extensive, and that's to get your knowledge up. But when you have to go and then make an argument, book breaking is what's required.
Definitely, that trick is just...
It doesn't lower your knowledge. It just makes you more efficient.
Yeah.
And also, I think the first thing especially I was speaking to you guys this year about the jump from first year, you have to be more efficient. Yeah. Because what's being requested of you and required of you has increased. So imagine you guys had that non-efficient approach when you started university, which everyone has. Imagine you still had it. Would you be able to cope with what's being asked of you in second year?
Probably would have dropped out.
Yeah, see? And it would be so unnecessary, wouldn't it? Because you need that skill set to cope. And what you'll find is you'll cope. As long as you do what's required.
I do want to touch on... so you have a blog, Financial Regulation Matters. I want to sort of touch on the distinction between like the books you write and the blog.
Okay.
And why you choose to write something for the blog and why it's something for the book.
Well, I write about everything in my blog and only write about credit rating agencies professionally. I do also write about credit rating agencies in the blog. Why do I have a blog? The sole purpose of why I started doing a blog was to practice writing. I don't believe you get good at anything without practicing. And it's the easy way to practice. So talking about my mentor in Durham, he was not even my PhD supervisor. He's someone I met. He was a professor in like geopolitics and political economy. And he said to me, send me 3,000 words every week on whatever you want. Wow. I was like, but I've got a PhD to do, so I said, I'm not bothered to do it. 3,000 words every week.
Wow.
And I did.
Just on anything?
Anything I wanted. In terms of professional, so it was essentially a blog. And the point he was making was a lot of academics have massive anxiety over writing, the actual art of writing. And they'll happily do the reading and they'll get to writing and it'll take months and months and months and they're not efficient. And he said, doing this will remove that. Because you'll be so used to writing, when you have to do it for real, you just do it. And that process is something that we give to you kids. So yesterday, I had a law firm come in And I've developed these scholarships with law firms who take on students and go through the years. So we have different firms doing that. And we had a mock assessment centre in one of the rooms. It was totally unnecessary. We did not need the mock assessment centre. The reason why we asked the law firm to do it for us is that when the students get to a real assessment centre, we want them to have done it beforehand in a safe environment where they think, oh, I can do this because I've done it before. I can do these little exercises because I've done it before. And it's the same with the blog. So once I get to writing my books, I don't have writer's block because I write almost every day. So I think my blogs are about 1,000 words each at a minimum. And I've done 320 blogs since I've started, so it's 300,000 words just in writing practice. So that's why I do it. Also, it builds my profile. So I have, 1,500 followers. And they're from credit rating agencies, regulators, banks, well, you name it. And a lot of things have come to my career, to my professional life, from this background of building a following via the blog. And then, so when I go to New York, I always reach out to people and put like you've seen on my LinkedIn, I'm coming to New York, it'd be great to meet up, and I'll just get inundated with requests about meeting up for a coffee. So that's why it was good to hear about you guys doing the podcast. It's the same sentiment of doing something a little bit extra, and you will get your returns from it. So that's how I started. It's different in terms of I write for a different audience. So I can't assume that people are specialists. So I have to change my language, I have to change my structure. On another side of it, it allows me to be more free. So I can ask questions that I can't ask in my articles and my books. And I can keep up to date with the credit rating agencies, so it's a good vehicle for doing that. But I also get to expose myself to different things that I wouldn't have known that end up being relevant sometimes. So like one of the things I teach students this year, not last year, is I draw a fried egg on a board from the top. And it's to show that there's the yolk is the technical element of whatever you're talking about, and the surrounding white is the context. And even though you don't have to with eggs, I teach them that you have to have both. You can't have one without the other. So the technical has to be applied to the context, and that's how you develop your analysis.
You taught us a similar thing in the first year, but we just didn't have the...
It was on a Friday.
Yeah,
I think I did 2 circles, and then I realised this is on a Friday.
Yeah.
So it's not on a Friday. But it's the case of... So, for example, recently I was writing about Donald Trump with the trade deal that he's done with China. And through another blog that I wrote, I realised one of the main things that's come from phase 1 of his trade deal is financial services are being sold to China for the first time in an undiluted way. So what used to happen, because China's communist, Western companies could come to China, but they had to partner with a Chinese company, and the Chinese company would essentially be the filter so that Western companies couldn't infiltrate Chinese society. But what's happening at the minute is, and this is what I was learning from the blog by doing different things, you have 2 competing elements. The West are absolutely dying to get into China because it's a massive market. It's so lucrative. Why would China change its mind? China's changing its mind because they are producing something called a One Belt, One Road initiative. And that is spreading their influence across the world. They are doing road initiatives in Africa, factory initiatives in this part of the world. It's around the world. It's massive, and it's essentially the world's largest infrastructure project ever. Yeah. And it needs a lot of money to do it, more money than they have got. So what they're going to do is they're going to ask people in the world, investors, to invest in China. The problem is, how can investors trust Chinese debt? They can't. So China needs financial third parties who are supposedly independent to rate them in order to prove to investors that the debt is safe to invest in. Chinese...
Do countries get credit rated as well?
So you have sovereign credit rating, so they'll rate, like, I think the UK isn't AAA, I think the US is. But what happens is, which is a problem, because they're US based. So then there's a potential conflict here. And also, when Standard & Poor's did drop the US credit rating, not long after, they were fined on a penalty for something else. And people suggesting that the two are connected. But the point being is that China needs this money for this project because on a world geopolitical stage, they're competing with America. And America is very ideologically broad across the world. A lot of people bought into Americanism. China is attempting to export China as an ideology, and how they're doing that is with this one belt, one road. It is the cornerstone of the new president's, of the current president's presidency.
Xi Jinping, right?
Yes. So he has staked his entire presidency on this, and it probably will come to fruition. But he needs money to do it. And this trade deal has allowed Moody's and Standard & Poor's into China for the first time without Chinese assistance. So what I've seen is, I wrote a blog on it recently, that's one of the major points of this trade deal. Because for America, it gets your financial services, which is their biggest sector. So they're going to make so much money, it's unreal. But at what cost? Because potentially they could lose their power on a world stage, because China, with this One Belt and One Road initiative, if they do see it through, most of the world is going to be indebted to China for a number of reasons. And also they'd be more willing to follow a Chinese lead on a global stage, because they're going to be more favourable to China if they come and made their whole road network up to date, or their whole telecommunications network up to date. That's what China's going for. And you can see there why I studied credit rating agencies, because without that it's impossible. Because what they do is they stand in the middle of the flow of money, and the modern society as we know it is capitalist, and capitalism only exists on the flow of capital. So that's why I studied them.
How do you see America sort of responding to this sort of Chinese expansionism?
How does America respond to most things?
I mean,
with force. It's either with money in terms of exporting Americanism. So when you see a McDonald's in Vietnam, Americanism as a concept has been exported. If they don't succeed with that, what else do? They send the army in.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is you can't send the army into Beijing, because Beijing has its own army and it's comparable, not in size, but I think it's bigger than the American army, but they just don't have the technology. But what you see now is, I know you want to talk about China later, but just to start that discussion, one of the issues you want to talk about the coronavirus.
Yeah.
One of the differences with China nowadays is when the SARS virus hit China, it was a very different economy.
Yeah.
Chinese economy now is much more mature, where they're not only just making t-shirts and socks and toys, they're also developing world-leading cutting-edge technology. So not only has China got a larger by population army, they also are now catching up in terms of technology. So recently they had their first aircraft carrier, state of the art, because I think they took an old aircraft carrier and updated it. They're now trying to catch up with American technological advances as well as military status. So where will it end? Probably not in a good place, any. But it's the Chinese right to do it. Because if America can do this, why can't anybody else? Well, I don't think it's an agree or disagree position. It's they have to defend their own position. And when you see things like, that's why you have such massive issues with, like in the South China Sea, sometimes you'll have like military tests, which really enrage, especially over the disputed islands. when they potentially clash massively because the two ideologies. America represents one particular ideology, China represents another. So philosophically, it's very.
On that note, would you say China's a bigger representer? Is that what I'm kind of losing my brain here? Yeah, of communism than Russia is now. Would you say that
Russia's not communist? Russia's not communist anymore. Russia is ruled by Vladimir Putin. And I won't talk about Vladimir Putin.
It's Putinist.
Well, that's what it is. It's autocratic. It's run by someone who's essentially runs the country single-handedly.
He's run it for like how many years now?
It's a couple of decades. And then what he's done is he's moved between the presidency and the prime minister role to maintain. And he's going to do the same thing again. He's just sacked the whole government to then put his new government in, which will mean essentially he'll bring in laws where he can bring himself in whenever he wants.
That was actually going to be a story in the podcast in episode 3, but we cut it.
There you go.
I'm not sure if you said
Sacked his own government. But then Chinese communism isn't communism. It's a hybrid, it's changed. So I'm fascinated by China, absolutely fascinated by the development, because in my degree, I studied Marxism as closely as anything. And then with Mao Zedong, he brought in his own version of Maoism. But a lot of people died because, not to go into too much, from what I could glean from my studies of communism, it can't work by definition. And the reason why it can't work is because it can't work whilst capitalism exists, or the memory of capitalism exists. Because if you say to somebody, listen, it's for the good of our country that you can't have that Rolls Royce. And I'll say, but them over there, they can have their Rolls Royce, why is that? And as soon as that starts, you have resentment, and that's why you have internal conflicts within communism. But what China did was, in the 80s, they had a man called, I will get his name wrong, Deng Xiaoping. Now, Deng was a economic reformer. He was in Mao's inner circle, but Mao passed away. They're infighting for the Communist Party, and Deng managed to come to a position of power, and he fundamentally changed China. And he said he wants something he called Chinese socialism, which was socialism but transformed to promote business. But you keep the mentality of socialism. And that's why I had a friend who lived in China, and he said, it's weird, there's no rules. There's literally no rules, it's just a free-for-all. But there is one rule, you do not speak ill of the Communist Party. It's the one thing, because it's sacrosanct. That's why they don't allow any representation of Tiananmen Square and the killings there, because it's against the concept of the Communist Party. But he brought in, Deng, modern reforms that allowed businesses to come in, and that's why now you see Beijing as one of the fashion capitals of the world, is one of the tech capitals of the world. That's why the money in Beijing is unreal, and the money around China. Look at the way China is now compared to how it was 20 years ago, and that's mostly because of Deng, because he brought in Western business.
Even learn about history.
There you go. Wow. But China's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think I heard this on Work Up to Money this morning. They amount to about 20% of the global GDP or something. So that nicely moves us on to the news story of the coronavirus and the massive impact it could have, because, like you said, China's economy now is massive, and if anything happens with them, everyone else is effectively going to be damaged as well, I guess. But I'll provide just a bit of background on the coronavirus. So I hope all of this is right. It is. So the coronavirus is a type of respiratory disease similar to that of MERS, which stands for the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, and SARS as well, which was... Thank you. SARS, which stood for Right. Okay. Because of that compliment. No, it's something acute respiratory syndrome as well.
Basically, it's kind of like the flu. It's got similar.
Exactly. Yeah. So the coronavirus that started from
severe acute respiratory.
I was close. But the coronavirus started from, is it a city or province? It's province, ain't it? Province of Wuhan, which is actually dubbed as China's Chicago. And ever since it's been spreading wild. I think the first case was late December of last year.
I believe so.
Yeah, late December of last year, and now the city's expected growth rate of 7.8 in 2020 has been slashed. It's obviously a huge tourist place as well. That's going to be affected, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens, I guess. But any thoughts on?
Well, what's your thoughts? What have you read about it?
Coronavirus is well, I don't think. I mean, so we have the province of Wuhan, which has been like quarantined basically, so nothing's going in or out. I don't know how much the virus is going to affect investment in China, as we talked about earlier. Just because, like, it doesn't seem to be like a pandemic. But obviously there's rumors that like it's worse than they're actually letting on and that whole thing. But just in terms of like what we see as face value, I don't see the virus stopping investment into China just because it seems to be somewhat contained.
I agree with that to an extent, but when you look at how a significant role that Wuhan plays in the Chinese economy, I would say that because the whole province is basically locked off, for the time being, that has to be the case. The impacts are going to be huge. So I think so far some figures from Al Jazeera's website are 7 Chinese movie premieres have been cancelled, around 400 restaurants closed, 17 I can never say this right, Uniqlo stores, Uniqlo, and 2 Disneyland theme parks closed. So there's already been a huge impact on the entertainment industry. So although the Chinese government are responding well so far, I think they've pumped a bit of money to deal with it. And there was a story on Instagram. I know Instagram is not the most reliable source, but they built a hospital. It was
a time-lapse video of like 10 days, and they built a hospital in 10 days.
Which is incredible.
Yeah.
So they are trying to deal with it, but that Chicago's locked for...
Well, there's elements that affect in terms of it. The Chinese Lunar New Year was recent.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be like 7 days, I believe.
Right.
And what happens is in China, you have the largest mass migration of human beings anywhere on the planet from the urban centres of China into the suburbs and the countryside. Now, I think they have to extend it by 3 days in a hope of stopping the mass migration, come back to the cities and bringing it with them. I did see something today, really, when we talk about the human element of business, when we often forget it. There's a massive, apparently, stigma in China at the minute where casual workers and let's say the lowly workforce, as people might see them, are being absolutely abused in China because they're being blamed for starting and sharing and spreading this disease. When you think about it, it's not their fault. It's not their fault. If you get on a train from somewhere and you catch this back, and these people got to work. And also, apparently, I've read about like Beijing being empty, streets being fully empty, so no one's even coming out to trade, no one's coming out to just conduct shopping. So
rightfully, investors are going to be worried because if your workforce cannot work for you, then...
Well, investors, I've read about factory owners are having to pay more for factory workers because they can't find them. So the people who do work are obviously their bargaining position changed.
How long do we think this is going to go on for?
Apparently, I read months.
Months. Wow.
In terms of people dying, I did read today there was a professor from MIT in Forbes talking about, if you really want to compare it to things, the flu crisis epidemic in the US was much more severe. I think over 10,000 people died in terms of across when you look at the statistics. So on that level, thankfully, it isn't as dangerous or as impactful yet. And hopefully it doesn't turn out to be so.
Months.
I think it's a case of, I don't know which side to fall on. On one side, the professor from MIT was arguing it's hysteria, and hysteria is a problem, and it's going to elongate the issue.
It'll make things worse.
It'll make things worse. It'll make the economic impact worse. It'll potentially put people at risk because people are scared to deal with people. Then you have people stigmatized and blah, blah, blah. But on the other side, if you do have hysteria, you have potential people trying to provide solutions, like building a hospital in 10 days, which potentially saves lives. So I don't know which is which, because China recently announced that they are blaming America for increasing this hysteria by stopping commercial flights, by stopping American citizens from going, by, I think, New York. Even when I was there in January, JFK was one of the first airports in the world to start screening Chinese citizens. As anyone who'd been in China, from when they came into the country, they were being screened for the disease. Those type of things add to hysteria.
Just this morning, I think the UK government sort of told all the Britons in China to come back, like 30,000.
I think they said something like, if you can get back, do get back, because you can't get back. The commercial flights have stopped. If you could manage to get a flight, can you even get out of the country? Because if you're in Wuhan, you can't leave. It's locked down. The army are at the gates. You can't leave. So even if you, let's say if you're a British citizen in Wuhan, I don't even think they're bothered. They'd be like, you're staying because you're in the quarantine. So I think, but the issue is then if you look at, when I was saying about like the fried egg scenario, business is about sentiment and fear and optics, very much about that. That's why Donald Trump can change the stock market price with a tweet, because they're very susceptible to any indication that their investment will be at risk. And when you see things like Boris Johnson saying, get home if you can, flights being stopped, that's what China are talking about in terms of impact on their bottom line, in terms of their stock market prices, their economic position. Maybe because if you think about it, this isn't like the Black Death. It's not. It's essentially it's the flu. Is it as bad as people are making out? Probably not.
That's why I didn't think it would have like that significant of an impact, because I assumed that like it would be over far more quickly. It wouldn't have like such a severe impact outside of Wuhan.
Well, the question is about the impact. Is it a real impact or an impact that you're told is an impact?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So, like, apparently I was reading, all you have to do, make sure you wash your hands. Yeah. Apparently the disease cells live on hard surfaces longer than the usual flu. So just be careful where you're placing your hands. And if you're out in public, let's say the equivalent of being in London on the tube, you should wash your hands after being on the tube anyway. There's a lot of people down there, blah, blah, blah. So there's things you can do to increase your resilience to it and to lessen your chance of catching it. But rather than put that on the news, it's, oh my God, people are coming back with a cough and now they're dying and stuff like that. And it increases hysteria, which is economically very impactful.
So, brilliant. 2020, so we started with World War III.
And it's only, February? So we got World War III, impeachment, coronavirus, Kobe.
Yeah.
But,
take it back to 2019, please.
Well, that's how you sell newspapers. Got to make it interesting.
But I think that sort of brings an end to this bumper episode of Commercial Minds.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Closing words to our listeners. If you have
Closing words. I don't. To be honest, it'd be to praise you two. This is. You don't have to do this. You know, and it's that type of. Students often ask me. It's very competitive in the marketplace. What can I do to this? And I think one of the things that they can do, which everybody can do, and which I appreciate is difficult, is to put yourself out there. To do things, whatever the thing is, go and do it. And you'll find your own passions, you'll find what works for you, with trial and error, but it won't come knocking at your bedroom door. It won't come knocking at your door. Like, do you want this fantastic opportunity? Very rarely will that happen. But if you're out there doing things, like you don't know who's listening to this podcast, you don't know who's following your LinkedIn, you don't know who's seeing what you're doing. But the important thing is to keep doing something. And I think, unfortunately, you get, especially your generation, my generation got it heavily, but you guys get it unreal with social media. You only see the finished product. You don't get to see what it's like. So, I mean, I love contact sports like boxing, UFC. Blah, blah. I always use the analogy to my students of Anthony Joshua. You don't see his 5 o'clock runs. You just don't. He's doing it on his own. If he's with a training partner, he might be. But you don't get to see his meal preparation, his sleep routine. You don't get to see his dedication. You just get to see him when he comes out of Wembley and performs. And I think because you don't see it, a lot of people don't value it. When, in fact, that end product is not possible without all of that. So that's why students ask me, how do I get a first? And I tell them, and they go, well, what else can I do? Essentially what they're asking me is, give me a shortcut. And to be honest, sometimes it's good to take a shortcut if it exists, if it's efficient, if it helps you get to where you need to be. But you shouldn't always rely or seek shortcuts, because the skill set you'll build is in doing the hard work. It gives you a sense of development that is a power in itself, not just the output. So by learning to do, I don't know, so what you're doing now is learning to communicate with different audiences, learning to research different things, and also to amalgamate that research into something that's palatable. You're learning different skill sets as you do it. And hopefully, I know I enjoy the podcast. The first one, you were apparently lounging on the mic, so that's why we didn't hear you properly. The second one, you were constantly saying, Terry, oh, I didn't know that. And you're supposed to be the ones informing us, not the other way around. You're not supposed to be informed on the podcast, you're the host. But I think the last one I listened to, I really enjoyed it. You'll get better as you keep going. Hopefully students listening are really enjoying it, because just before we finished, in the law school, we're always trying to think, what do our students need? It's not for us to dictate to you what you are getting, because times change. University is very different from when I went to university. So we speak to employers a lot, because they're the ones who you want to impress at some point. And the first thing they tell us, probably the only thing, commercial awareness. They need to be aware. And what it used to be, commercial awareness used to mean go and read the BBC's business page. But that's not enough. It just really isn't enough. You need to be able to know the restraints of certain people, what's affecting them, what the impact is, what the impact of that economy is on that position. Why would they take that position in that deal? It's because it relates to this employment issue. And you're always connecting the dots in a larger picture. Doing something like this, so for you two, it's helping you two. I know that, because you're starting to have to learn more about commercial effects. And for your listeners, they're seeing you two, especially in the last episode, connect the dots. And by that connecting of the dots, when you're talking about commercial issues, that's what commercial awareness is. So let's say, for example, let's say you want to become a solicitor and you're dealing with a corporate client. You have to consider their commercial background, where they're from, what their company represents, and what their objectives are. If you just think, oh, your name's Bob, and you must need things that Bob needs. That's not what your client needs. Your client has a particular set of issues and restraints. And by teaching students about these things, like, so when you guys talk about Tesco and Lotus and all the different things that are happening in that country, especially when you have the regulators being worried because you have people, different companies within, I forget, Thailand. Where was it?
Thailand.
Yeah, Thailand and Malaysia.
Different companies within Thailand who already own grocery department type stores who are then going to cause a monopoly issue within them. You wouldn't think of that. You just think, oh, Tesco's selling its business. And it's that type of digging deeper to make the connections is what is important for the students to learn. So well done. I'm really impressed by it and I enjoy it. I won't listen to this episode because I hate the sound of my own voice. Hopefully the students and the listeners like it. Always happy to receive people on LinkedIn. Always, if any students are listening, if people want to write for my blog, they're more than welcome. I know, Tenny, you've written on HS2.
Yeah.
Always happy to do that, and if people want to get in touch.
Yeah, we'll drop your links in the description.
No, thank you.
And
But yeah, no, thank you for making the time to come on here. I think it's been a brilliant episode.
I think there's going to be like
hopefully the audience, they understand why I was so hyped the last episode. So yeah, so thank you for making the time. Hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and thank you, listeners, as always. Just make sure to interact with us on Twitter, get the conversation going.
Yeah.
Just tell me any last words.
Get that commercial mind going, I guess.
What a way to end. Fantastic. I think you were talking about you want titles for the episodes.
Yeah.
That's it.
Get your commercial minds going.
But thanks for listening, guys, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you, guys.